Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be taking a look at the 8 teams competing in the OWCS Japan region Stage 2 coming up here in the next couple of days. Tomorrow actually these games will be kicking off, so if you do not see the videos I did on the Asia Pacific region or on the Korea region, I will link to those in the description, as well as I'll link to the Korea one in the cards and at the end of this one. So you can check that one out. Those two regions obviously underway already, but the Japan region starts tomorrow with their first game. So let's talk about the teams before those games so I can share my thoughts. So you can see here the 8 rosters. Throw them up on the screen. You can see we have Veryl, Insomnia, Niam or Niam Gaming, Namakuji Brothers, Ravati, Lazuli, Miku Fan Club, X Supreme, and Telomere. So those are your 8 rosters. Let's start talking about them and give my thoughts on them. Let's start with the team that won Japan last time around. Didn't lose a single map when it came to the actual playoff bracket, and only lost a single map in the entirety of the Japanese region. That is, of course, Veryl. This is the best team in Japan by far. This was a team that represented Japan pretty much by and large, this roster here in the World Cup. The only change from the last stage is that they have gone from having 2 tank players to 1. They no longer have the tank player Plankton on this team. They just are rocking with KSG as their solo tank for this team. But this team is very good. This team is better than every other team in Japan by quite a large margin. If history is anything to go off of, they should easily be the favorites to get out of this group as the top seed, the second seed at absolute worst. They are pretty much above and beyond every other team in this region and in this tournament. So I suspect that Veryl will once again be sitting at the top when all is said and done here. So not a lot to talk about there other than just how successful they've been and how strong of a team they've been. So expectations for them are quite high. I think it's pretty obvious why this team has been together as long as they have, because they just win all the time in Japan. It's been pretty consistent and not really a lot of reason to doubt them going into this tournament. Next is Insomnia. They were the second seed back in Stage 1. They did undergo some pretty major rosters. You can see their current roster is the DPS players Undersea and Aid. Oh man, I can't speak. Undersea and Aid. Undersea coming back from Stage 1. Aid, Korean player who comes over from the SPG roster in Korea. As does the tank player Milgaru, also Korean player coming over from the SPG roster. And then a new support line with the players Aiku and WGYM, replacing their former support line of Blink and Karu, who were 2 Korean players. So this team is almost all different. Undersea is the only piece remaining from the initial roster. Aid and Milgaru, pretty good. Obviously, SPG's been a relatively successful team in Korea for the past couple of years, so bringing in 2 players from that team doesn't mean terrible things. I'm curious to see how well this team will be with these 2 on it, how they'll work them in. This feels very much like the kind of thing where they're looking and saying, hey, we need to be able to punch up and try to compete with the best team in Japan that has managed to basically get all of the best players on every single role from Japan, with Nico and KSG and Cloud and Mint on Veryl, just to name a few. So definitely a team that's trying to punch up. I think they are a pretty good shout to be one of the top 2 teams in this region. I think they are pretty likely to do well, but it's not a guarantee, obviously. Major changes to their roster, of course, like I said, so it's hard to say, well, they did well last time. Well, this team is so different now. And they didn't have to play through any kind of qualifiers because they did well in Stage 1. So I'm curious to see if they're able to keep up that success, but I think they should be fine. I think they're in a pretty good spot to continue forward and bring that success into the next round and probably qualify for that Asia LAN. Next, we have Niam Gaming. This team also did compete previously, though, with quite a few changes, and rightfully so. This team was the worst team in the region in the first stage, so they underwent major roster changes. I believe the entire team is brand new, but you can see they have DPS players Scarlet and Daisy. Scarlet, a Korean import for this team. They have their tank player Dox, also coming in from Korea. Then they have Chang as well in that tank line with the supports Mimosa and Y. Not familiar with a lot of the players here. For those of you curious about Scarlet and Dox, Scarlet has played a lot of time in non-Korean contenders. Did play a bit in Korean contenders. No, I guess this Revival team is not. I guess it's a Korean team, so I take that back. Actually, I was under the impression it was regular Revival, but it was not. So playing on some pretty small Korean teams, and Dox was playing on Pandia, which was, I believe, competing in Japan. So another kind of veteran of the scene. So an interesting kind of team to look at. Obviously made some changes, but we will see how they look going forward. But I think it's going to be hard to punch up, especially with all these new rosters. I think it's the thing ultimately that Varel has going for it that most other teams in this region don't, is that most of these teams are trying to essentially rebuild themselves to chase Varel. And so Varel is continually getting better by keeping the same core roster together, whereas other teams are trying to match them by bringing in new pieces. And you can't really teach synergy in the way you can just by playing with each other for long periods of time. And so it's tough to look at this scene and really think any of these teams are going to really challenge and hit Varel hard when you just see how good they were in Stage 1. Unlikely at this point, but I obviously would love to see it. Up next, the biggest tragedy in all of Japanese esports, we have Namakuji brothers. Nozzle is no longer on this team. We all know and love Nozzle, the Roadhog player. He is gone. Instead now, there's NSCSL as their tank player coming out of Korea. They have DPS players Peace, New Jeans, and Bambi. Bambi does return from the previous version of this roster. Support players, you have Jisoo, KU, Menhera, and Euclid EUC, with Menhera being the only, or Jisoo as well. Jisoo and Menhera both returning from that last Namakuji Brothers roster. Now, to be fair, that Namakuji Brothers team was not very good. They went 2-6. They were pretty bad in the previous stage, but they have a new team now, lots of new pieces around them. I frankly don't know anything about any of these players. Assuming they're better than what they were before, if this core is intended to be a little better, that would be nice. But I don't love this roster in general. I think that it's hard to look around this region and see a lot of players that inspire the confidence that you get out of Varel, just because of Varel's success over the years, obviously. But I think this team is interesting. I don't think they're going to be a particularly dangerous team, but they're here, and they certainly have a bit of experience under the belt, especially the players returning from last stage. So, they're not the same without Nozzle, but, maybe they'll be a better team now. Maybe we'll learn to love this version of the team just as much as we did when Nozzle was here. Who knows? Only time will tell. Next is Ravati. You can see they have damage players Solace, Harutun, and Hofak. Hofak and Harutun both returning from Stage 1, Solace being their addition to this team. They have tank player Fearful, so the opposite of Fearless. He does join this team for the first time for this stage. Then the supports, they have Epic, NHZ, and Hesty. Epic and Hesty returning from stage 1. The other player is a new one. This Ravati team was pretty good last time around. They finished in 4th of the stage 1 tournament, so not an awful team. So another team that could potentially punch up. Six Blow, who were the team that finished in 3rd, no longer competing, or at least maybe didn't win in the qualifiers. I don't know exactly what happened there. But that opens up at least a spot for that 3rd place, which could get you a wildcard gig, which could potentially turn into an Asia LAN gig. You never know. But this team is interesting. I think that they should be one of the teams that is competing with Insomnia for that number 2 spot. I think it's probably a 2-horse race between them, but at this point, only time will tell. But I think they should be one of the better rosters on here, just based on the fact that they were a very solid team in Stage 1. I'd imagine they bring some of that same energy into Stage 2, though it is a little too early to be able to tell exactly. The next roster we have is the team for Lazuli. This is a new team. They were not here in the first stage. And they have a couple players here on loan from Six Blow. So there's a couple of players here that have been pretty successful when it comes to the overall level of play in the region, though who knows how they work with this team environment they're on now. But they have damage players Hidden, CC2, and Imp, who CC2 was on the former Namakuji Brothers roster, so not a new face to this scene. But Hidden and Imp, as far as I know, did not compete in the first stage, at least in Japan. Then you have tanks Leonopteryx and Godsam. Leonopteryx was on the old Insomnia roster that got 2nd place, so pretty solid player there. You kind of expect quite a bit from. I don't believe Gold Sam competed in Stage 1, so new face there. Then you have the support line of Kiru01, Sakume, and Navis. I mentioned that they are both on loan from Six Blow. Sakume did play for Six Blow in the last stage. I don't believe the other 2 players, Kiru or Navis, did at all play in Stage 1. So that is a team with some veteran presences, but also some other kind of just new, or at least up and coming players on this roster. And I think this one could also challenge. I think if I had to guess, I would say this is probably the other roster competing for a spot in the top 2. You think about the fact that they adopted some of what the Insomnia core was, and a couple of players from Six Blow, 2 teams that were successful in the first stage, relatively speaking. I think there's a pretty good chance this team is able to compete quite well with, a team like Insomnia or a team like Ravati for that extra spot guaranteed for the Asia LAN. Once again, I don't think they're going to be better than Vero, but I think at least they're in that range where they can maybe challenge them a bit at times. I think they've gotten some of the talent they needed. They added some very solid players from around Japan, as well as a couple of good Korean imports to kind of help round out the team, which ultimately I think is the most important thing you have to do, is find those players who are pretty good and are on some decent teams that are not maybe the face of their team or competing as high as you want. Hidden was playing on, I believe, Poker Face recently, so also played for Panthera for a little bit. So you're getting some good talent on this team. It's about kind of working them into the roster, but I think it's a pretty good team, and I'm interested to see how they're able to carry forward as well with some of the new pieces. Very interested to see this one. Next is Miku Fan Club X Supreme. Oh boy, this team is everyone's favorite streamer team. They have damage players Aoki Yahara, who I am not familiar with. They have Tayo, the former legend for the San Francisco Shock, and Killa, rounding out that trio. They have Romani as their tank player, and they have Frogger, the Lucio Extraordinaire, and Supreme as their supports. This team came in through the LCQ, so I don't know who they had to beat to get through, but you know what? Shout out to them. I don't really expect them to be among the top teams in this group, but you know what? It's fun. It's a good time to see a team like this make it this far and actually get a pretty good amount of games to play, because the way that this region works, obviously you got to play all your group stage games, and then you get to the actual like seeding decider and elimination play-ins, stuff like that. So we'll be seeing a shockingly high amount of Frogger and Tayo here in Japan. And you know what? I'm all for it. I'm down. I love it. That's exactly what I wanted to see, so happy to see that that is where things are as we move into this one. Final team here is Telomere. I don't know anything about this team, and there's a reason why most people probably are not very familiar with this team, and that is because this team is a high school championship team. And I think it's a very awesome thing to see that Japan has invested quite heavily, and with some pretty good money and backing too, to developing high school tournaments, grassroots high school tournaments that allow for high school teams that do get the chance to then compete in the OWCS is awesome. So this team just very recently qualified, but you can see here they have the damage players Amateru and Sour 4, tank player Sorosuke, I believe, and then the supports of Hinis 4KU, or Hinisaku maybe, and Suzuku. So high school team, I don't think there's a ton of expectation for them to do incredibly well, but it is really cool to see a team of high schoolers get a chance to then win the championship and qualify for the professional circuit. There is a very unlikely road, but technically these players, these guys, whatever, from high school, could end up on stage in Stockholm in a few months to compete for cash money. And that is really cool to see, and a really awesome part of the way that Japan has built their circuit is to work in stuff like this. I'm all for it. I really love it. I think it's great, and I hope we see more stuff like this in the future. So those are the rosters. I know this one's a little quicker than the last two, but Japan is a very odd region to kind of look at, because really it has been hard to gauge much of what is going on in Japan, because it's just Veryl absolutely dominating and obliterating everyone they see, and the other teams just kind of existing, trying to keep up. There's a lot there to kind of have a look at. So I think it's always interesting to see. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves, where this next kind of level of these teams goes, and if anyone's able to compete with Veryl at a high level. It's unlikely, I think, but we'll see, obviously, as time goes on. What happens, who does well, who doesn't do well, all that type of stuff. So I think Japan is very fascinating. I think it's going to still be one of the more interesting regions to look at. For now, we will have to wait and see if anybody is able to actually kind of compete. But until then, I'm going to assume Veryl and Insomnia continue their success and move on from this region. But that's going to be all for me for today. Let me know in the comments down below your thoughts on this. If you agree or disagree with my assessment on Japan, let me know. Love to hear from you, but that's going to be all for me for today. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Your support does help out a lot with the channel. But that's going to be all for me once again. So I thank you all. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.